In this last week of the course, we will be discussing external validity of empirical work. And there's a reason why I put this at the very end, because as you will see, it brings together all of the topics that we discussed in the previous 4 weeks. To motivate our focus on external validity, let me briefly introduce you to a paper, a field experiment that was conducted now 20 years ago, that had a great impact on our view of choice on behavior. It's all linked to Wilken and Sons jam, including strawberry jam. Let me actually briefly quote what the authors of this study did. 2 research assistants, dressed as store employees, invited passing customers in a grocery store to come and try our Wilken and Sons jams. Shoppers encountered one of 2 displays. On the table were either 6 or 24 different jams. On each of 2 Saturdays, the displays were rotated hourly. The hours of the displays were counterbalanced across days to minimize any day or time of the day effects. Consumers were allowed to taste as many jams as they wished. All consumers who approached the table received a coupon for a $1 discount off the purchase of any Wilken and Sons jam. And afterwards, any shoppers who wished to purchase the jam needed to go to the relevant jam shelf, select the jam of their choice, and then purchase the item at the store's main cash registers. This field experiment is known as the jam experiment. Very fitting. Now, the result of this study was that more people at the limited choice table purchased jam compared to customers in the grocery store who represented the broad choice, so the 24 different Wilken and Sons jams. And this was interpreted as evidence of choice overload, and that would then result in reduced sales. So the idea is that once you see 24 jams, you are like, oh my lord, I can't choose anymore, so I walk out of the store without any of those jams. I'm not going to use my $1 coupon. There's an American psychologist, Barry Schwartz, who wrote a book that basically builds on this one experiment with the title The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, in which he makes pretty broad claims based on this experiment and actually another experiment that was also conducted by the same authors and was reported in the same paper that took place in a classroom. And he says that this paper provides the evidence to disprove the claim that added options can only make us better off as a society. That's a pretty broad claim, right? If you look at the source of all of this. Jim Munsey, actually an entrepreneur who started a company offering firms the possibility of doing field experiments with their own within their own strategy, put it as follows. Popularizers telescope the conclusions derived from one coupon plus display promotion in one store on 2 Saturdays up through assertions about the impact of product selection for jam for this store, first, to the impact of product selection for jam for all grocery stores in America, second, to claims about the impact of product selection for all retail products of any kind in every store, third, ultimately to fairly grandiose claims about the benefits of choice to society, as Barry Schwartz just did in his book. And so it shows you that apparently people had no trouble predicting that the results of this one experiment would hold in completely different settings for completely different persons and in completely different times. And if you look on the internet, and you'll see plenty of articles following this reason without much thought, like this article here. So why simplicity is the key to winning customers. The claim is then that if you are presented with too many choices, then you will not be able to choose what to eat for lunch, for instance. Now, when you are thinking about external validity of such an experiment in a store on 2 Saturdays, then i.e. whether those results also hold in other settings for other persons and in other times, then we need to have a fairly firm idea of what is going on here, right? The trouble is now that many papers, including this one, is pretty much a black box exercise. And we pull this handle and we see this happen, and we're able to make a causal claim, but only if we understand what happened during the experiment can we be more confident about whether this treatment effect is also going to be similar elsewhere. And in this particular context, that means, so what actually happens when you are confronted with many choices? It may actually help, right? If you have a fairly peculiar preferences when it comes to jam, maybe ginger jam or what have you, then it may actually help that you are provided with many choices, because then you can actually pick the jam that you particularly like, and you are very likely actually to purchase this jam, right? But on the other hand, it may also be that you feel overwhelmed when you see 24 of those jams, and then you walk out of the store without jam. But that may actually depend on whether you're in a real hurry, whether you already know your preferences very clearly, so before walking into the store, so you exactly know what you want and you actually see this particular jam, and then you walk out of the store with your favorite jam. Obviously, it may also matter to what extent the product choice that is presented to you differs. Jams, they differ in terms of taste and how they look like and all that. But is something similar also going to hold for products that differ on many dimensions? And a good check on the sanity of your claims as a researcher is that, how likely is it that all of those grocery stores, and this is the typical picture, providing many choices, are just completely ignorant. They don't know what they're doing, that they, if only they would reduce the options presented to this customer here, then sales will go through the roof. Well, I would say that's a little unlikely, because it's their bottom line. And as a researcher, what do you care? You can claim anything, right? There's no penalty for claiming complete nonsense, right? So, generally speaking, researchers and particularly academics are the ones who are ignorant. And people whose income directly depend on the choices that they make are more likely to be right than you. So the first thing is that, do you have any idea on how this research result that is so surprising came about? The second one is, okay, we may have this paper by Ian, Garrer and Lapper, but how actionable is the evidence, i.e. week 4? And so its first step is, what is the probability that this is a true effect? And I think it's worth having a close look, because if you look at the paper, then it looks at 2 hours in one store, and at this so-called extensive assortment booth, i.e. with the 24 jams, 4 out of 145 people bought a jam with the coupon, whereas at the limited choice booth, this held for 31 out of 104 people, i.e. the conclusions of this paper are based on the purchase of a grand total of 35 jars of jam. Are we able to draw very firm conclusions on how choices presented to customers affect their behavior? Now, we can actually go through this exercise, and I actually picked a few numbers, not completely out of the air. I got the sample size out of the paper. I assumed that the effect size was 0.2, so that's relatively small, a significance level of 0.05. And then I actually use R's power test to see what the power of this test that the authors did may have been, and I get a result of 0.34. So that seems to be fairly typical of most of the literature. Say that we take our prior to be 0.1, because this seems to be sort of pretty much a random, well, it's not completely random, but some hypothesis that is probed within the psychological literature, and there's actually a lot of new research coming out that many, if not most, of the claims in this literature turn out to be not true, right? So they cannot be replicated. So when we choose our prior to be 0.1, we know that power is 0.34. Then if we fill out Bayes' formula, then we get our posterior, and that is 0.43. Now, I may be off to some extent, but if you believe those numbers, then how actionable is that? Right? If you go to your store manager and say, well, with a probability of 43%, those results are right. So why don't you reduce jams, and why not also the dishwasher detergent and what have shampoos and all that by like 75% to boost sales? Well, I guess that your sales manager, just laughs and finishes coffee, right? So this is not a high posterior by any means. And secondly, how about the effect size? And unfortunately, we could not really conduct an empirical exercise here, but still, I learned you that to how to report your results properly, and now actually, it also helps if you have a closer look at, what, based on this paper, what should we expect? Well, this paper suggests that if we reduce product choice by 75%, so we go from 24 to 6, then sales go up by 900%. Right, so think back about this picture of this customer walking through the store. So if we would reduce product choice by 75%, then this person is likely to buy 9 times as many products in the store. That is a little hard to believe, right? And even more so that if we do not ignore the prior evidence, then there's actually lots of studies showing that more choice leads to more purchases, as Jim Munsey points out in his book. And so when you talk about action, whether the evidence is actually actionable, then so people whose bottom line is directly dependent on these strategies, these marketing strategies, they follow a very different strategy. They do not one study on 2 Saturdays in one store. No, as Jim Munsey says, that if you do this properly, Retail experiments for such in-store promotional tactics are typically executed for 20 or 30 randomly assigned stores for a period of weeks. Alright, so the theme is let's now broaden our focus from internal validity, so whether we are able to make a causal claim in the first place, to external validity. Is our claim also to hold for other persons at other times and in other settings? And that is basically the challenge of prediction. And sometimes such predictions are sort of near transfers, i.e. Then the question is, for example, taking this grocery store, is this effect that we found for those jams also going to hold next year with roughly the same customers? And that is not a trivial question, right? Maybe the economy tanked. Maybe there's a secular trend in customer preferences. Maybe there's a new competitor in your locality that greatly affects your sales. So, i.e., that even for near transfers of your research results, it's often not so clear whether the estimated treatment effect still holds, let alone for so-called far transfers. So, what happens if you reduce options at different places? So not in Wisconsin, but in California, or in the winter time rather than the summertime. What if we do this in a completely different neighborhood? Right, and then the question is, why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't your results from this one field experiment hold for those other settings, for those other persons and those other times? Well, i.e., there's an invitation to think about it. Why would you care about this at all? Well, in the first place, if you are going to work at an organization that follows a certain policy or strategy, and you want that to be informed by evidence, then obviously you'll have to think about this. Can we actually transfer the results from another setting conducted at another time with other subjects? Can we transfer that to our setting? And if you remain in research, then if you care about more than publishing your results alone, if you also care about having an impact, then obviously external validity is absolutely key. And even if you are not interested in how your results are used in the outside world, then still, if you just remain within the literature, then hopefully your research results have broader meaning than only having found an effect of X and Y in a particular setting that you studied. Now, and to structure our thinking about external validity, I look at 3 reasons why external validity of your empirical work may be compromised. First, I look at theory. So maybe that you do not have a full understanding of how the treatment affects, how the treatment effect depends on the properties of the population that you're dealing with, and also the particular situation that you are working in. One. Secondly, is the evidence actually actionable or no? And that relates to last week's topic, strength of evidence. Does the evidence that we now have collected provide a good picture of what we can expect if we indeed pull this handle? Finally, okay, we have done this experiment within a particular context at 1 or maybe 30 stores, but now we want to scale this up. How about changes in cost and benefits of a treatment if we certainly no longer limit it to a couple of locations, but for example the complete state or the complete nation? And towards the end I'll make a couple of comments on the popular term evidence-based policy. And the nice thing is that when you think about external validity, we can actually, when we go through all of those 3 issues, we can use all of what we learned in the previous weeks of the course.